Let's talk some Torah. It's Parshat Va'era, and last week we marked the 51st Yahrzeit of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. This week we took in as much as we could and let it out through our bodies, the legacy of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And today is another day where we are called to do good. Just as Rabbi Heschel taught us that the most important thing we can do is transitive concern, make a decision for someone else's sake, so too today do we take in the message of Dr. King, which is the best thing you can do is something for someone else. Same Torah, two very different life stories that led to an articulation, a prophetic articulation. And now we look at this week's Parsha. We find ourselves just on the cusp of liberation. But in order for liberation to happen, something must break. It's true that when we have systemic issues, which are the ones that both Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King pointed to, they didn't point only to the manifestation of wrong, the Vietnam War, racism, economic injustice, health disparity, human cruelty. They pointed to the systems that lead to those manifestations. You can see something wrong in the world. One decision a person or a group makes incorrectly. But until we acknowledge that it is part of a pattern, we won't change the underlying cause. We at UJA are incredibly active when it comes to homelessness and food insecurity. But we have to be involved in lobbying to end food insecurity and not just stocking with dignity food pantries. We have to be involved with helping people gain the skills so that they can earn their own life instead of taking an approach which only hands out what we can. We have to do both because there are immediate and long-term needs. Perhaps that is a way to understand this week's Parsha, because over and over we'll have this conversation throughout our lives and certainly throughout Jewish thought about free will and Pharaoh's hardened heart. Because for the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh hardens his heart. That's this Parsha, Va'era. Next week, we will hear about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. And often we have the conversation, how can we hold Pharaoh accountable for God hardening Pharaoh's heart and the decisions Pharaoh made with a heart that was hardened by God? Where's free will? But we have to hear this Parsha and next Parsha together in order to have the conversation about patterns and injustice and what it takes to break wrong systems. Pharaoh's heart was hardened on his own volition 5 times, despite enormous problems besetting his administration, as it were, affecting the people, blood, and frogs, you name it. It's bad, and it happened in the first 5 plagues, and Pharaoh still wouldn't recognize the necessity for change. Sometimes we are in that way. We're in a rut, as individuals, as families, as groups. And because of the pattern of hardening our own hearts to the possibilities that we probably even need ourselves, let alone what Egypt needed for its own welfare, we put in process a pattern that will not change. That's how the Midrash actually understands God hardening Pharaoh's heart for the final plagues. Because it's unfathomable after everything that Pharaoh has witnessed and been through and lost. It's unfathomable that the cries of his own people didn't soften his heart. And yet what we learn is, after 5 times of him hardening his own heart, he just can't change. Even God couldn't intervene to soften Pharaoh's heart. And so because of the incorrectability of Pharaoh's pattern of decision-making, something broke. Egypt broke. The greatest power in the known world broke. We call that liberation, we call that a miracle, but it is powerful and painful to think about when change happens like that. It comes at enormous cost. We are taught that Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, left Egypt. The text says chamushim. That doesn't happen in this week's Parsha, but it does happen when we finally leave. Chamushim is often understood from the word chamesh, 5. And just as in French, the word men, M-A-I-N, means hand and also means arms. But the tradition actually suggests that chamushim is also related to the word chamishim, 50. Only one out of every 50 Israelites chose to leave. How bad must things have gotten, and for how long, that even the Israelites couldn't change when it was in their best interests? Friends, this is something that requires enormous patience and education, and sometimes the acceptance that change comes at a cost. There will be loss. Someone will lose something when change happens. As the great Israeli author Amos Oz of blessed memory said, every champion of change is a traitor in the eyes of one who won't. Change is hard. I know that that's not exactly the way of understanding Pharaoh, the plagues, Israelite slavery, and liberation. But think about it in that way just for a moment with me. The pattern of injustice, the systemic inhumanity that Egypt represented, refused to change even when it was clear to everyone but Pharaoh that the change was necessary. He couldn't even save his own children. The plague of the firstborn, that terrible, terrible thing, happened because he just couldn't change. And they couldn't make him change. And his closest advisors said, Etzba Elohimhi, it's the finger of God, don't you see? The answer is no. For a moment, he broke. He said, yes, you can go, but then immediately, each time, snapped right back to the pattern. And it tells you that change is hard. This world is an unfair place to so many. I was recently in conversation with my Rebbe, my dear friend Ruth Messenger, and Stephanie Gary, who's often with us in our morning Torah sessions. Stephanie was asking us questions about grief and the pandemic and the work that we do. Oh, Stephanie, you're here. Hi, friend. So glad you're here. And Ruth pointed to the imbalance in our world that the pandemic exacerbated. America was off its kilter, Ruth said, became off its kilter. But what she knows all too well because of the heroic work she does to make things better for others, what she knows is that that isn't actually new. We all know when we pay attention. We all know when we pay attention to the urgency of now, as Dr. King said, when we open our hearts and remember that we are messengers who often forget the message, as Heschel taught. We know that there are way too many corners of the world that don't have the luxury of taking time every morning to learn Torah. It's what we do as UJA, and it's what each of us does as human beings who believe in the humanity of every other human being. But friends, I want to say what should be obvious given everything else we've said today. Change is hard. And the inequity of our society, I'm talking about America now, the inequity has to change. And you can say a change is going to come. But until you and I are going to be willing to risk something to make it happen, think about where you make your investments, if that's something you do. Think about the work you do, if you're blessed to have work. Think about the home you have, if you're blessed to have a home. To walk around grateful, as we should, is also to walk around responsible. To walk through life saying, I can change. The hardest thing to do is to open my eyes to my own circumstance and to believe in my power to make a change. And if I can accomplish that, then I can soften my own heart and not create a pattern that is inescapable for me. Hand on heart. Who knows, friends? God was unable to change Pharaoh's heart. The tradition says that because God was unable to change Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh had dug in so much that his heart just wouldn't be changed, that then God said, fine, it's got to break. This has to break. So you stay on your course. And yes, as Jerry said, hopeful, not always optimistic. Hope is a choice. So I'm asking you, friends, to learn the lessons, and maybe I'm just saying it to myself in front of all of you. May we learn the lessons of the harshest parts of our history, recent and ancient, and learn to place our hand on our heart and to promise to work on being open in a world that sometimes pushes us shut. We must learn to soften our hearts. If this world is to have any hope, we must be willing to endure the costs of change. If more people are to have what they deserve, not for us to say what they need, no, what they deserve, I am no more entitled to life, liberty, and happiness than anyone else. And that's on me, because I have more than I need. Maybe that's a mantra we can say. Maybe. Let's try it for a second. I invite you, not demand. I just invite you. And I'll do it myself to model it, and I'm going to let this message in as best as I can. Hand on heart. I have what I need. I have more than enough. I can change. Who knows? That might change the world. Your openness might change the world. So I bless us to be part of the necessary change. We've got each other. It won't cost too much. It'll cost, but you'll still have enough. Let's go into a good day, friends. I'll see you tomorrow. Bless you, friends. See you tomorrow.